Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to walk you through step by step how to get Docker Engine in PiHole 6 installed on this Terramaster F4-425 Plus NAS. By the end of the video, you'll have a working PiHole installation that's persistent and ready for your home lab. Let's dive right in. The first step would be to install Docker Manager and Docker Engine. We can do that up at the main menu by clicking the Docker Manager icon. Here we're presented with the install option. Now, if we scroll all the way down, you can see we also have Docker Engine. Now, installing the Docker Manager will install both. So let's go ahead and start the install process. The operation succeeded, and you can see now it's downloading and installing the Docker Engine. In this next step, we'll be creating a Docker shared folder. So let's come up to the control panel. Click on shared folder, then come over and click the plus sign to create the new folder, and let's call it Docker. Then click the next button. We can click next again. We're not going to use encryption. The permissions are okay. The permissions are okay here as well, so let's click next. Do we need storage? We're just going to click confirm. We're not going to give it any storage quota for now since this is just a demonstration. Let's click next. And then confirm our settings, acknowledge the prompt, and then if we go over to the file manager, we could see now on volume 1 we now have our Docker folder. Now we're not done yet. We're going to create a few more folders inside this Docker folder. So the first thing we're going to do is come over to the plus sign and create a new folder, and we're going to call this PiHole. And then we're going to go inside the PiHole folder and we're going to create two more folders. We're going to create another folder called PiHole. That'll be a subfolder. And this is where we'll hold all the PiHole data. And then we're going to create one more folder and we're going to call this DNSMasq. And we'll talk a little further about this folder in a few minutes. Okay, so now that we have the prerequisites out of the way, we installed Docker Manager, Docker Engine, and we created our folder structure. The next step is to create the actual PiHole container. So let's come over to click on the Docker Manager icon. You can see now that it launches the actual Docker application. We don't have any containers, we don't have any projects. For this installation, we're going to actually use a project. So we're going to click on Add Now, and we're going to give our project a name, and we're going to call it Docker. All right, so just a quick note. In this step of the video, I should have been naming the container PiHole, not Docker. That was my error. But in reality, you can name the container whatever works best for you. All right, now back to the video. The next step is to fill in the project path. So we just need to point this here to that original PiHole folder we created in our file manager. So we're going to click on that and click on Docker, select the PiHole folder, and then click Apply. Now that we have our project path selected, we need to fill out the next part, which is the configuration file source. Now we're going to be using a YAML file for this. If you don't know what a YAML file is, it's basically going to contain, in this instance, our PiHole configuration. So we're going to choose Create YAML File. And now, where do we get the information to put in here? Well, that's where PiHole documentation comes in handy. Look at this here. Now this is a bunch of configuration, easy to read, but you have to understand what's here. There are a couple of things we have to change. Now, I could say this. You can copy this entire sample configuration and make a couple of modifications to it, and you'll be good to go. For example, you want to look at the area that says default ports. It's important that we change our default port of 80 and 443 to something other that's not being used in your environment. So we'll do that. Then we're going to come down under environment. We're going to set our time zone. So you can see here the sample file. It says Europe, London. You need to put in your information here. So for me, for example, it would be America, New York. Now, if you don't know exactly what your time zone would be, the proper syntax, you can go to the website here. They actually give it to you for your reference. Next, we need to do is change the password. This is the password that would be used to access PiHole through the web browser. And then finally, if we come down here, we're going to look at this section here called volumes. This is another area that we need to update. Now, we want to point the information here. We're going to go from the colon back, and we're going to replace the information here with the PiHole subfolder that we created in our file manager. So basically, we're going to be pointing the folder on our file manager to where the information is stored on the actual container. If this is a first time PiHole 6 installation, in other words, you've never used PiHole in the past, then you're done. However, if you're upgrading from a previous version of PiHole, then we need to come here and uncomment this line right here, and you simply uncomment by removing the hashtag and then replacing this information here with the path to the DNSMasq.d folder that we created. So it's pointing our file manager folder to where it's stored in the actual container. So that said, I already have this copied and editing to make it a little simpler, so we're going to continue and move on. And I'll show you the changes in my actual file though. So let's come in here and we'll paste it. And I'll zoom in so you can see this here. So you can see I changed the default ports from 80 to 8088. And then I changed the 443 to 4455. And then here under time zone, I changed it to New York, well, actually America, New York. For now, for the demonstration, I made my web password PiHole. And then here, I have the folder structure. So we created our Docker folder on volume 1. And then we created a main PiHole folder and then a sub folder called PiHole. And there's the path that we replaced from the original sample file. And then I uncommented out. And this is just for demonstration purposes. Again, if you're not coming from a previous version, then you don't have to do this. But I commented out the next line and I filled it in with the volume, our Docker folder, our PiHole folder, and then our DNSMasq.d subfolder. I replaced that information there and we should be good to go. Now, once you paste in all the information, it gives you the option to verify, which is very handy because it's going to tell you right off the bat whether there are any errors or this file, this configuration is okay. So let's do that. You can see we got the check mark. So let's go ahead and apply. So now it's building the configuration, it's building the container. Let's come back and test it out once it's done. Okay, so now we should be able to access our PiHole container via the web. I have my browser open. To get there, we need to type in the IP address of the Terramaster NAS, followed by the port number, followed by admin. So it's going to be formatted in this syntax. It's going to be the IP address with a colon, the port number, 4455 we did in this demo, /admin. And if we did everything correctly, we should be brought to PiHole's login page. Now, to actually access PiHole itself, just type in the password that you put in the YAML file. So for the demonstration, we did PiHole all lowercase. Let's click on Login. And there you can see we successfully logged into our PiHole container. So that's pretty much it. We installed Docker Manager, Docker Engine, and PiHole 6 on the Terramaster F4-425 Plus. We confirm that the container is running by accessing it through the web. So if this video saved you any time or frustration, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. And if you missed the review that I did on the F4-425, please click the video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching.